This is a huge one. Daily weight fluctuations are normal. So watch the overall trend instead, right? You're not a robot. Your weight can't be predicted like some kind of machine. There are many, many factors that will affect your body weight on a daily basis. And they're often, not all, but they're often totally normal and totally natural and not something you should immediately be reacting over. Some examples, and they really fall into, one main category here, though I'll give some other examples too in just a moment, and it's water retention. So, 60 to 65% of the body is made up of water anyway. And so, it's easy to think how just a small change in your water retention can lead the scale, and this can go both ways, to either work in your favor or work against you from an objective results-oriented weight perspective. Examples being dehydration, menstrual cycle, or rather, so this is all under the bracket of water retention, remember. So water retention as a result of perhaps being in PMS or the luteal phase, the back end of the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. Sodium intake can, of course, affect water retention. Glycogen storage, urine and stool weight, would you believe? This is not necessarily a significant amount, but let's say you're having some maybe TMI, but let's say you're having some constipation troubles right now. Yes, that could indeed lead to you holding a little bit more weight than usual. This one is a little bit more complex, but muscle activation and growth, so the body adjusting its water input for this, it only really applies to people that have just started training for the first time, whether that's cardio or strength training. But maybe a better example would be with strength training. If you're not used to doing that and then you're activating all these muscles, that's going to adjust, water ratios and whatnot. So there are all kinds of things that can affect the water levels, water retention in the body, and this can affect your body weight. Other things such as medication, alcohol consumption, hormonal alcohol is a really big diuretic, meaning it strips the body of water. So if you've ever had a night out and you're doing a lot of boozing and you wake up the next day and you've noticed that you look quite lean, because some people will mention this and they're like, "What? This doesn't make any sense. I was awful. I made awful decisions last night, but I've woke up and I'm really lean this morning. What's that about?" Well, alcohol is a very powerful diuretic, really dehydrating. So alcohol consumption can affect body weight as well. And I suppose, again, that goes into the water retention category, if I'm being a stickler. Hormonal changes, genetics, of course. Some people just genetically have quite large fluctuations. But here's the key point to take away from this first lesson, really, those things considered and those examples reeled off. The factors I've just mentioned can or are independent of your fat loss. And that's the key, because you're not going to know exactly, even though I've given you a bunch of examples, you're not necessarily going to know exactly why your weight is coming out as a certain number on a given day. You're not going to necessarily do that analysis. Or sorry, you might try to do the analysis, but you're never going to know for certain that that's why you're a little bit higher today or a little bit lower today compared to the previous day. You're not going to know for sure. And it doesn't matter. That's almost a bit of a microanalysis, I would say. But what does matter is that whatever it is, there's a very good chance that if you're making, quote unquote, the right choices and sticking to your plan that usually leads to weight loss, there's a very good chance that you are actually losing fat despite what seems to be happening to your weight. And I think, again, that's another big lesson here. Just as a side point, weight loss and fat loss are two very different things, and they don't always match. Of course, there's symbiosis, but they don't always match. And basically, bottom line, this is why you can't put too much stock on individual weigh-ins. I'm not one of those, for the record, I think people know this if they've been following me long enough, but I'm not one of those, never look at the scales, they can't be trusted. There are much better ways to, measure your progress. I'm not one of those people that says that sort of stuff. In fact, to this day, I still believe that the scales are by far and away the most useful, practical way to actually measure one's weight loss progress. But I never, ever judge a client's progress by a single weigh-in. Never, ever. We're looking at the downward trend overall. We value the scale's readings, absolutely. So again, that's not to say that the numbers that a scale is outputting are useless. I value a scale's readings, but I'm collecting data. I'm assessing several weigh-ins as opposed to looking at each weigh-in in isolation compared to the previous one. Does that make sense? I think that's just a really big distinction. many people overemphasizing the individual daily movements as opposed to those weekly trends, which show you a much better overall picture. Because when you've got lots of data, chances are you're going to have lots of data to reflect the full picture of water retention changes and body weight fluctuations. Does that make sense? Whereas if you're just picking one piece of data, you could be subject to huge swings because you're not working with much evidence. You're not working with much proof, right? And now it might happen that on the one day a week you weigh yourself, if that's what you're doing right now, it's actually a fairly accurate reading, but you're never going to know that. You're never going to know if that's an accurate reading because you've got no other data to work with. Make sense? So lesson number 2, definitely just to reiterate, daily weight fluctuations are totally normal, totally natural. Watch for the overall trend instead. Don't microanalyze the day-to-day changes. So many people get worked up about this stuff. They give up prematurely. They get impatient. And again, it's even if you stay on track, even if you are able to sort of manage those the reaction to those day-to-day fluctuations, it's still unnecessary stress anyway that you're causing yourself. And you're still doing a bit of a false reading there and assuming that each individual weigh-in is worth more than it actually is.
It's the single best thing I've ever done is work with Ryan. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true.
Hands down, you're the best decision I ever made for myself in a long, long time.